My name is Jarpa Dawuni. I'm an associate professor of political science at Harvard University in Washington, D.C. And I'm also the founding director of Harvard University's Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership, which was recently launched in 2020 with a vision of being a center of excellence for Black women, feminist activism, and transformational leadership. I am currently a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies, STIAS, a wonderful place for creative minds, and I am working on completing a book manuscript, which will be my 5th book, but the first of my 5, which will be a monograph looking at women in law across the continent of Africa. So in terms of my research agenda, I qualified as a lawyer in Ghana in 2001, and then went on to do a PhD in political science at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. So in my attempt to bridge the interdisciplinary background I have with law and political science, and my focus always has been on women and gender issues, I have been researching women in law across Africa for the past 7 years. So the current book I'm working on is my first monograph, and it's about women in law across the continent of Africa. And I'm being intentional about using the word across Africa because, as I always say, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and so we should always aim to look at the diversity across the continent. Having said that, I am mindful of the fact that I cannot possibly in one book capture the whole continent, and so I'm being selective in using the word across, but also looking at case studies among the different regions of the continent. So this book probably will be the first book to examine women in law across the continent comprehensively. My previous books have been focused more on women judges and issues of gender and judging across the continent. But this one would look at women at the bar who are lawyers or advocates, women at the bench who are judges and magistrates, and women in academia, so law professors and law lecturers. What do we know about women in these areas? How are the legal systems in these countries structured? How do women become lawyers? How do they become judges and magistrates? And how do they get into academia? Now, we know that globally, women have had contestations in entering these spaces. The legal profession has predominantly been seen as a male-dominant profession. And so women have gradually broken into the field, and across the continent of Africa, that often meant that in the early years, women had to study abroad in either France or Great Britain to become lawyers. Within these areas, in the past 7 years, I've actually been collecting data. I've done in-depth interviews over 8 countries, and I have done about 200 interviews. So I'm getting into the analysis of the data and finding out what are the numbers. Increasingly, more women getting into the legal profession. So we see that there's a good number in some countries, 50% or more. But how is that translated into their substantive representation? So we may have the numbers in some countries, but not others. And we're seeing that women, in as much as they are still struggling with the institutions that were set up as male-dominant institutions, are making progress. In some countries, we have seen that at the bar, women have been rising as partners in law firms and managing partners. At the bench, we see that women have risen into positions of chief justices, which is a top leadership position in the country. And in the academy, we're also seeing that women are rising into leadership positions as deans. Once again, this is not even across the continent, so I want to be careful to state that. So generally, this book would really help us understand the situation of women within the continent across different places. The most important thing I think this book would do is to center the experiences of women across Africa within global discourse on women in law. And I'm hopeful that the findings will help us inform policymakers, will help us inform decision makers, will help us inform civil society, will help us inform academia and researchers about the importance of centering Black women or African women within the legal professions from an Afrocentric perspective. And I hope that this research will help contribute to our understanding of women in law globally.